Welcome, everyone, to episode 34 of the Single Malt Strategy Podcast. I'm your host, John Marciniak, and today I am here with Troy Goodfellow, guy behind Paradox Interactive. You do public relations for Paradox, I believe, right?
That's my primary task. Yeah, my official title is assistant developer, and there's a long story there. But primarily, my job is public relations for Crusader Kings, Europa Universalis, Hearts of Iron, and Imperator.
Wow, many hats right there.
Well, they like to keep the history titles all bundled up. I used to work doing PR with Stellaris, but they decided to keep all. There's a lot of stuff. I certainly couldn't do all of our internally developed games. So they've pushed all the history stuff into one bundle, and that's me.
So with that big title right there, what are the responsibilities for that position?
My primary job is media relations, making sure that media and online content creators are talking about our games or playing our games, working on messaging. What are the big themes we want to hit when we have a new release? Covering some of the marketing phrasing, long-term PR plans for events. For example, for Imperator, last fall we had a special event in Bath, the Roman Baths. We had an event there with some media. They got an early hands-on with the game, and we got some good reports out of that. So planning events, working long-term, putting out PR fires if there's something that a little mini crisis pops up, which happens from time to time. How do we handle it? Working with corporate on that sort of management. And, long-term planning and scheduling. When we have a release coming out, what weeks can we not, what does it collide with? Is there a Total War game coming out that month? When are all the major conventions? Is there a Rockstar game coming out that month? Just keeping tabs on the industry as a whole, so I know that when a mid-sized studio like ours has some room to breathe.
Yeah, the gaming. I was just reading some news about E3, and they were saying how gaming has gotten so big now that they're like 24-hour gaming sites, and there was no point of having an E3 anymore because news is just always coming out. Like every day, there's some big news from a gaming studio.
I mean, E3 doesn't serve the same purpose it used to. I mean, anybody can stream to their audience at any time. You don't need a whole conference infrastructure. Nintendo's been doing it for a long time, and Microsoft, and of course Apple's known for Apple doesn't go to CES to stream its message.
Yeah, they usually come out with something on the day of CES that kind of.
And Ethan, and the calendar's full of other conventions. We have how many PAXs do we have now? And you have
a lot.
You have GDC, bigger European conventions. You have a lot of, if you're doing an RPG, sometimes you'll want to be at Gen Con or Origins. When there's Twitch cons now, there's just so many conventions that the news value of being at E3 doesn't have the same cachet it once did. And it's expensive to rent space there. And E3 has kind of seen the writing on the wall. It used to be, very much a media event. And now they're selling tickets to, fans, to the hoi polloi to come and show up. Which, as a former journalist, used to go to E3. The crowds were bad enough when it was a bunch of retailers and movie star children and media trying to get around, and to have fans there as well when you're trying to do your job. What used to be very much a media event. E3 is really going through a lot of struggling, I think, trying to figure out what exactly it's going to be, what it wants to be. And a lot of studios are pulling out, just not they seeing the budget there. When they can do their own event, they can stream their own event. Paradox doesn't spend a lot of time at E3. We find that GDC is often a better convention for us because the journalists are there. It's not really a fan event to reach the fans. We have our own convention. We have Paradox Con, which has been in the last couple of Mays. It used to be just a media event. The last couple of years, we made it a general community event. We're having it in October this year in Berlin. It's going to be even bigger than ever, I think. Last year, we doubled the size of invitations and tickets sold. This year, I'm not sure I'm going to be doubling it, but it's going to be big again because it's just so much easier for companies to directly contact their communities. I mean, that puts a lot of pressure on community people and on public relations people. It does mean that you have to have really good social media teams, and it's something that I think we at Paradox have always taken very seriously.
So I'm kind of curious, how did you? I know you before Paradox, you developed this podcast which took off. I mean, it's I would say the probably the top, the number one podcast for gaming. Three moves ahead, and I know I listened to it. I know Matt's a big fan. He was on your show, and so I'm kind of curious, how did you go from that podcast to working to Paradox?
Well, for strategy gaming, yeah, it was one of the first, I think. I was a games journalist, a freelance games journalist. I was living in Maryland with my then wife. I had a really hard time finding full-time work, so I ended up being a freelance games journalist. Didn't pay very well. And you have to remember this was a very different time in 2009. There wasn't any Twitter then. So it was kind of hard to, evangelize for certain types of things. There were still a lot of print reviews. There were a lot more review websites than there are now. And I thought it would be a good idea to just have people that I knew and liked to start a podcast to more or less talk about what we thought of the games we'd reviewed. Because a lot of back then, there weren't 5 strategy games every month. So it was very, very easy to stay on top of everything going on in the strategy game community. You could play everything because there were not that many. Steam still hadn't opened up. So me and my friends, Tom Chick, who runs the Quarter to Three site and was a big freelancer then, and Bruce Garrick, who is probably my favorite tabletop war game writer. And he does a podcast too sometimes called Wild Weasel. And our friend Julian Murdoch, whose podcast, the Gamers with a Job podcast, was one of my inspirations. We decided to have a show and talk about the strategy games we've been playing. And the show went through a lot of different formats. We, try to do news and then stuff we were talking about. But then we decided, well, let's just do a theme. Let's pick a theme or one game and spend a whole hour just talking about it. And we got because Tom Chick was on the show, he used his forum to kind of push it. So we got a really stable audience going forward. Then we got, some people listening to it and got some lucky hits. And it was a good way for me as a freelancer to promote my work. It was a good way to provoke discussion about the games because very often, because I said there was no Twitter then, and not everyone was on the same internet forums and there wasn't a Usenet, it was a way for journalists to talk about the games with each other in ways that before that really hadn't been done. There were other podcasts. One Up had a popular podcast, and Giant Bomb, of course, had a popular podcast. But they all worked on the same site. Here it was, freelance journalists who might have reviewed the same game or talked about it in different places, sitting down together and talking about it. So you'd have different opinions, different perspectives, and I've often said it's the best thing I've ever done, and I think it still is up there. It was a great chance for me to, brand myself, get strategy games out there as a topic of discussion. It certainly led to a lot of work for me. And when I left the podcast in 2011, when my wife and I separated, I couldn't be a freelance games journalist anymore because I couldn't afford to support myself on a as a freelance games journalist. It's not a job for a single person. So I had to move into PR, which meant that I had to pretty much give up the operation of the podcast. I'm still a co-owner, but if I was in PR, I couldn't be the directing voice of the show because it's a conflict of interest. I moved into PR with the team called Evolve PR, run by Tom Ola, based in Vancouver. And I turned the reins over to Rob Zachney, who had been on the show a few times. He was a freelancer, still kind of getting his feet wet. He had a couple of big bylines. But I think Moves Ahead played an important role in getting Rob more recognition. And now he's always been able to write circles around me, and he's a great podcaster and a very, very dear friend. And, I was still involved in the show. I'm still involved in some of the scheduling. I'm still on it as often as I can be. But it's gotten in all kinds. We have a core group of 4 or 5 people who are on the show, and Rob kind of herds us. And we have a producer now. I mean, it used to be just one Skype recording, but now we have a producer, Michael Hermes, who takes our individual audio and splices them together so it all sounds good, and does the uploading. And the Patreon we have, he manages that and all this other stuff. And the Patreon goes to, paying for people who are on the show. If there's a freelancer who's on the show and he's having a rough time, but he's been on the show 3 times, we'll throw him in some Patreon money because, that's work. That's time. Treat your people like professionals. The Patreon allows us to do that. The podcast enabled me to do a lot of things, including, get more familiar with the Paradox games. The Paradox was an account that the first PR company I worked with, Evolve, Paradox was one of their clients. And they were very happy to have me run their PR. And that was for Crusader Kings 2 and Europa Universalis 4 when I was with Evolve. And then when Paradox decided to not work with Evolve anymore, they said, well, we're firing you, but we're not firing him. So they hired me on and didn't really have a job for me. They just said, we like working with you. We got to find something for you to do in our marketing department. And that's why my title is assistant developer, because my original job description was very long. It involved what can we have him do? So the chief operating officer, Susanna Mesa Graham, someone who I owe a great deal of my good fortune throughout my life, and Johan Anderson, who is the lead of game development and a product development studio, the guy behind Europa Universalis and Imperator. They wrote this job description for me, which was, do liaisons with educators and do research and edit developers' diaries and edit corporate communications and all of this other stuff. And I just ended up doing PR mostly. So now I'm pretty much in marketing, just pretty much doing PR, though every now and then I will do some content work. I will write documentation. I will help with primary sources for the content creation teams. I will write scripts for video trailers. I will edit a lot of copy. Not as much as I used to. Some of our executives used to be very, very not confident in their English. So they'd send me their stuff to proofread. It's fine. Your English is fine. It's better than my Swedish. Just go. I just went from a games journalist to PR. It's a very common path, games journalist to PR. It's not a path I wanted to take. I never wanted to be in the industry. I'm not somebody who became a games journalist to make games. I liked critiquing the games. I liked discussing them. And I really miss being able to really dig deep in a critique. It's a big part of my soul and why I can't let go of the podcast completely. But there's a conflict there. I can't, for example, if there's a big space game coming out, like a Galciv or a Space Traders or Endless Space, that is a podcast that I cannot be on because we have Stellaris in a competing space. So I just am not allowed to be on those shows because I only want to be seen as, there's a Paradox guy slagging the competition. You just cannot have that. I'm very protective of the podcast. I don't want it to ever, even though I'm on the show, I don't want it to ever be seen as, here's a Paradox guy slagging something else. So I'm very, very careful with the shows I'm on. It's very often going to be shows about war games that really aren't in our space, for example. Or I was on the Civilization Gathering Storm show because I've worked with 2K before. I've worked on Civilization stuff as a freelance contractor way, way back in the day. My love for the Civilization franchise is very obvious, and I know some of the team there, so I don't think anybody would take it wrong if I said something negative. So I was a little more comfortable doing that. But I would never be on an Endless Space show. And I won't be on Ajon is doing a game about ancient Rome, and I won't be on that show because of Imperator. So the podcast still a very, very important part of my life, but I got to be more protective of it than I was.
Wow. So I have to ask, so out of all the projects you worked on in Paradox, which is your favorite project that you have worked on throughout your time?
My favorite game is Europa Universalis 4. It's my favorite game ever. I think it is just the perfect balance of the content that I like, and I think there's enough variation that I'll never be bored playing it. It is an absolute favorite. I think my favorite game to have worked on I mean, Europa Universalis did a lot of work on that with Dev Diaries and stuff. And it was great fun. But I think it's Imperator. I think Imperator has been the most fun to work with. I think a lot of that is because as we've grown as a company, we can take some more risks. We have a really strong, dedicated community and social media teams who now work very closely with me in PR. So it's not like me doing a PR thing kind of on my own. We have this tightly integrated team of people who are bouncing ideas off each other, and we cooperate, and we have all kinds of feedback back and forth, and do our schedules clash, and does this meme work, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's just been a lot of fun working with these people on a new product. It's always a bit scary, and there are things we haven't been able to do because we didn't have time or money, and there are things we were able to find time and money to do surprisingly. So, actually, we can manage this, and we can pull it off because I work with just some of the really best, smartest people. I mean, Max doing our trailer work, and Rod doing our community work, and Philip, who manages us all. It's just a really outstanding group. And the development team, Johan and Joachim and everybody on the development team have been very, very, very good to work with. They've been very accepting of sometimes when we say, no, we can't work with that schedule, adjusting to it. And I think as Paradox has grown, one of the big concerns has been, will it keep its culture? Because when I met Paradox long, long time ago, they were 12 or 20 people, and I knew all of them. Like they did a Paradox Con in New York in 2011.
I remember that, yeah.
And they flew everybody. The whole company came to New York for that. And now they're 300 and like 8 years, which is just crazy. So that small town feel has been kind of replaced by a professionalism of, here are silos and here are tasks and here's who's responsible for what, don't go flitting between projects sort of thing. But we haven't lost that, okay, we're all in this together. We're all in here because we love this company. We love its games. And that connection hasn't been lost even as the company's grown. And I've really seen that all come together in Imperator. I'm very, very lucky to work with these people.
You mentioned Imperator. So Imperator is literally around the corner for launch. And
Yep, it is.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I mean, I'm assuming your forum's like buzzing down, up and down with can't wait kind of thing.
Yeah, the community's pretty excited. When they got that release date, they were very happy.
So this incredible game that you have has a whole community just excited and really anxious for it. Now, I'm kind of curious, what inspired you guys to make this? Because when you announced it, I was kind of like, whoa, I had to take a step back and be like, wow, this is going to be incredible. And some of the features you posted in there, and I've watched some of the video logs that you guys, video streams that you guys did, and it's just like the game is incredible, beautiful, and there's just so many new features and engines that you put into it that it's remarkable. So I'm kind of curious, what inspired you to do this?
Well, I mean, this is our second Roman game. I mean, we did the often forgotten Europa Universalis Rome.
I remember that.
Back in 2008, I think. And it was... Paradox games are kind of weird in that sometimes the ugly ducklings get a lot of love in places. Like we see this with Victoria 3 being everyone wants Victoria 3. But before Victoria 3 was everyone's call, there were a lot of people begging for Rome 2. One of our vice presidents, Shams Georgiani, one of the smartest guys in the industry I know, he would go to conventions wearing a Rome 2 T-shirt just to troll the audience, even though it was nowhere on our radar, because this is what people were asking for. I mean, and Europa Universalis Rome it's a game that has a lot of issues. But you can see a lot of it still in Imperator Rome. So Imperator Rome is kind of a do-over. It's kind of a sequel, but also kind of not. So it's a game where we came back to a lot because it is an era that Paradox and the teams, they think they can do it right. They think that they kind of missed some stuff with EU Rome. They think that there were a lot of things that they really liked. Barbarian Migration, they think they got that done really well. They didn't think they got the trade working very well. So they wanted to have a second chance at it. So there were a lot of, like all of these projects, I mean, it had been thought about and debated on what should this game look like internally for years and years and years. I mean, there are many projects live and die before anybody hears anything about them externally. There are games that I have betas of on my Steam account that will never be released because that's how game development is. There are things that I can say and things I can't say. But Rome was something that they really, really wanted to make happen again. So they decided we can make this happen. And it was one of the goals was kind of internally, can we announce this and get it out in a quick time? How quickly can we develop a really good strategy game? Not that it's rushed or anything, and because it's a lot of behind the scenes development for a very long time. But what does it take to build a strategy game? I mean, what kind of team do you need? We're upgrading the engine. So a lot of this is kind of there's a lot of testing going on in Imperator because this is it's not a Clausewitz game. This is one of the Jomini games. Jomini is the updated Clausewitz. So it's largely a new engine in places. I mean, it's still based on Clausewitz, but like Jomini is an upgrade on the Clausewitzian theory of war. This is kind of an upgrade on Clausewitz. So it's okay, let's try and make this work. There's a lot of experimentation going on in Imperator. Johan's really is the lead designer, and he's pushing a lot of stuff. And there's already a lot of thinking on, okay, what's the next step? What's the next step? And it's been really exciting to watch the Slack channel just bubble with creativity. And the great thing about the classical period, and one reason we wanted to do it, is that it's a subject everybody knows a little bit something about. Everybody knows a little bit about Roman history. Like they all know who Julius Caesar is, know who Cleopatra is, they know who Hannibal is. They've seen Gladiator. They have a feel for what Roman history was about and what it should look like. And there's always this connection between a mass audience and Rome. So it's the kind of period we can go back to and say, okay, we want to try out some new stuff. We shouldn't take a risk and do something on Mesoamerica before Cortez shows up and just do it on Mexico in 1300. Or let's just dive really deep into a Victoria 3 type game, which is a bit of a harder general sell. As much as our fans love it, it really takes a bit of a hard. It's kind of a push.
Okay.
But Rome it's a popular topic. It is a game we wanted to come back to. It's a game the audience wanted us to come back to. And it's the kind of thing where Johan thinks we can take a lot of risks, push some chances, and still get away with it. And we've got 5 weeks, 6 weeks before it comes out. And it's April 25. It's the same day that the new Avengers movie comes out.
Well, rest assured that all of us will be probably.
One of my friends called me last week and said, "Hey, do you want to come out to the Avengers movie with me and my boyfriend?" And I was like, I might be half dead with vodka by the night of the 25th. I'm not that deep into comic book movies. I'm already 8 behind anyway, but I'd like to see you guys, but that's just not a good day for me to be seeing people. April's going to be a stressful month. I mean, it's going to be a good stress. We've got a lot of great announcements coming out, some really good promotions coming out. We're looking forward to seeing what streamers and media say about the game. But April's going to be fun. It's going to be a very tiring fun. And it doesn't help that we have Easter weekend, like right before launch. Easter, Good Friday is the 19th.
I think
and
so.
Sweden takes off Friday and Monday.
Oh.
So the Friday and Monday before release are holidays in Sweden. I just get the Friday off. So it's going to be, we're going to do it. the game's in great shape. We've hit our release candidate. We're in good shape. But it's these times of the month that I get really excited because I'm always nervous. What are people going to say?
I'm gonna
And in 6 weeks, my baby comes out, and are people going to say it's an ugly baby or not?
I'm sure it's gonna be a hit. I'm sure your server's gonna be slammed, but
Well, we're looking forward to if you guys talk about it. I look forward to hearing what you say.
I'm kind of curious. So, when your next paradox, because you were mentioning that, I guess early a couple of minutes ago that somebody was wearing Rome 2 at one of your cons. So, if somebody is wearing, or people wear like Victoria 3 or East versus West kind of shirt at the next Paradox Con, does that make you guys go like, that might be?
No, maybe the vice president wearing a Rome 2 shirt. This is one of our vice presidents wearing it.
Oh, okay. All right.
Just to troll the audience.
Wow.
Because we had not announced it. It wasn't even. I don't even think it had been programmed yet. Like nothing had been even put into code yet, and it was just all done to completely troll the audience, to make them think he was going to be announcing Rome 2. It might have been PAX, Sham standing up at PAX in a Rome 2 shirt, and just not saying anything, and just making the audience hate him.
I think I saw a forum post about that. And it was like a huge thread. I remember reading that.
Yeah. We don't let Shams do that anymore. But then now we're publicly traded. I don't think he's allowed to. I think that was before we went public. Now there are a lot more rules on how you can and cannot tease your audience.
So with Imperator, you guys are adding a lot of content to this game, and you're changing a lot too.
Mm-hmm.
From what I understand, there's going to be multiple cities in a province. So you're taking a big step forward in expanding this engine. I'm kind of curious, where did that inspiration come from? Are you pulling stuff from like Hearts of Iron, EU, Vicky, all of them, or where's that major influence coming from?
I mean, you kind of have to ask Johan this, but I mean, it's something that I think we always want to make our maps more detailed. If you follow the Europa Universalis forums, you'll see there's always a lot of, and if you look at the updates for all of our expansions, the free updates, generally there's a larger map update because we like to make our maps more detailed, more reflective of the actual history and the actual period. Now, it's a limitation to that. You have to make it somewhat reflective. But we want to have this idea that, provinces are, a large area, but they have more than one population center. But generally, they'll have like one big city and a lot of other smaller cities. And each of these places can have their own goods. And you might have, Latium might have, one city's big in olives and another city's big in iron, but they're all in the same province. So the province gets all of these benefits as long as they hold that city, but that city goes away, then that province loses some of those benefits, but it's still an active Roman province or something. So we want to have a little more flexibility in how trade goods can work, how cities can work, how sieges can work, because you can't afford to have a fort in every single city because they're expensive, just like in Europa Universalis, post Art of War. Forts are expensive. So, where do you put your forts? And if you have multiple cities to choose from within a province, that gives you a lot more flexibility, especially once the map has a lot more choke points. Mountains are a lot more significant. There are a lot greater barriers. Like you can't just cross east-west Italy. The Apennines are just right there, cutting Italy in two. So there are a few passes across it, but generally it's not that easy to cut through. So there's you get a lot more strategic options when you can go into further detail. And that works for a game like Rome, where pitched battles are what's going to decide a lot of wars, not just possession of territory. A lot of ancient territory was taken very, very quickly. It was generally ancient wars were a couple of large sieges and some pitched battles, and not a lot of standing around a province waiting for the meter to hit 100%. You'll still have to do that from time to time, to show that making some progress in the war and to make sure your lines are together. But the more detail you can have and the more options you can have tactically, I think the better our maps will be. And this is, again, part of the experimentation, I think. How detailed can we make our maps and still make them flexible and realistic? I mean, would you want to do this for a Europa Universalis 5, for example, or a Crusader Kings 3? And these are kind of detailed maps we want to think about going forward. And I think this is a great time to do that now that our engine's flexible enough for it. And we have a time period where mobility is variable and actually an interesting strategic option. Another example related to this is ports. You can't build ships in every seaside place. Like, just because you have a seacoast doesn't mean you can build ships. You have to have timber for one thing, but you also need to have a port. And a port is a special structure, and you can't build more of them because ports were, as they were historically, generally natural and then upgraded based on whatever was in place naturally. You wouldn't just take a seacoast and put a port there because that wasn't there at the time. So you have a port in Ostia, and you'll have one at Carthage, and you'll have one in the Piraeus. And these are the places you can build boats. Every seaside country will have one. But this will greatly determine what you can do as a naval power, and giving us more provinces to choose from allows us to have coastal provinces that are just coastal provinces, and not everything is a ship base.
So I had going into this Imperator, I wanted to ask you, like, what is the most, I would say, the biggest obstacle that you guys had developing Imperator? Like, what was the thing that kind of made you guys sink down and be like, okay, how are we going to implement this?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, if that ask the team this, they would know it better than I do. I mean, generally speaking, the hardest parts are technical. There are things like AI, coding, making sure the AI knows what it wants and sets its priorities correctly. But I would think AI is always the biggest challenge in every single game.
I know with AI for Paradox games, I can definitely see the refinement with every game, because now in Hearts of Iron 4, the AI kicks my ass. I literally, like, I just played a mini game of, I was UK and I got my ass handed over by Belgium. So
I think it's their division design. I think we've upgraded their division design skills or something, that they just know how to, take their 3 or 4 slots and make the most of it. Which is a big part of the game. A big part of Hearts of Iron is making sure your divisions are equipped right, not forgetting to attach an artillery brigade, for example, or giving some engineers. All these other things are very important things in division design. I think that's a big part of the advantage that the AI has in that game. I just love what they're doing with that in Hearts of Iron.
So since you mentioned Hearts of Iron, I wanted to kind of dive into this topic here, because you had Man the Guns released, and I think it takes Hearts of Iron to another level, because you added the fuel system, ship designer, really, really fleshed out the naval aspects, added so much content to it. So when I was playing it, as I was playing it, the thing that popped up in my head, well, 2 things popped up in my head, is one, what else can you add to Hearts of Iron 4? Because I feel like you guys did everything. You fleshed out the land side, you fleshed out the aerial side, and you fleshed out now the naval side. So all 3 are done. And then I was starting to think, I said, I wonder if Hearts of Iron is ready, this engine that you guys have for Hearts of Iron 4 is ready for like a modern day or Cold War conflict kind of game or DLC.
The problem is an issue with a lot of Cold War games. You see, like Geopolitical Simulator and all of these other games out there. They try to replicate the modern world, and there are a lot of them on Steam, and they're fine. But you get into the Cold War and the modern era, you run into the problem that players want to start wars, and if you have great powers going around starting wars in the Cold War, then it's kind of not the Cold War anymore. If you have, the Soviet Union invading West Germany 7 out of 8 times, then you're not really reflecting what the Cold War is. So a Cold War game and a modern game would have to have things like, you'd have to have a United Nations that actually does stuff. You'd have to have non-governmental organizations. Multinational corporations, I think, are the most important quasi-legal non-state actors of the post-war era, because they They've promulgated coups. They've promoted development. Uh, they're selling jeans in Red Square. I mean, all of these things are important parts of the Cold War period. And you have to have a system that reflects those non-military, economic, ideological, philosophical types of things that aren't moving tanks around. You have to have incentives for the wars to be proxy wars, that the Soviets and the Americans aren't going to fight each other, but they'll stir up some shit in Angola or Vietnam, and that should be where the wars are being fought. Now, how do you do this as a designer? There are a bunch of ways. I mean, one thing you can do is just have, like Twilight Star, will have like a DEFCON counter, and things get to a certain point, and then the fight starts. You have to make so players can't game it, so they just want to get their nukes fighting. You could have it so nuclear war is considered a loss, like in the Balance of Power, old Balance of Power game from the 80s. If the Soviet Union and the Americans go to war, then the game's over and everybody loses. There's no winning state, and there's no glorious explosion. Just a black screen, and then you lose. So you're not rewarding anybody with the visceral thrill of nukes flying. You could make the superpowers non-player characters. You could only play a middle power or lower and respond to great power pressures. That sort of thing might be an interesting game. You just can't take the Hearts of Iron stuff and just advance the timeline without dramatically changing how the system works, because so much changes in the post-war period in how governments operate. I mean, could you imagine doing a global simulation today that didn't have international banking and the flow of money, that didn't have the importance of technology and certain types of surveillance as an important part of the game? Geopolitics isn't as state-based as it once was. And, the state-based model probably worked fine for understanding politics. Like, get to around like 1974, 1975. And then really the multinational model, I think. I mean, I have a PhD in international relations, so this is kind of my thing. The state-based model just kind of falls apart as an analytical tool because it competes with all of these other interests. So you need to find a way to reflect that in a game. And I don't think any game that's tried to do this has really succeeded. And I think because they want to have the T-72s and the M1A1s fight it out in the Fulda Gap. If you want to make a war game, make a war game. But that's not a Cold War simulation. That's not in any way a geopolitical grand strategy game of the Cold War or the present era. Hopefully, I'm going to say hopefully the great powers don't go to war again in my lifetime. That will be really, really nice. I can't predict the future, and the world is uncertain. There are a lot of challenges to doing that. I mean, you mentioned East versus West earlier, and that's a project that wasn't a Paradox developed project. It was an independent team, and we're always sorry to cancel a project. And I wasn't involved with that team in much detail, so I have no idea how far they were from finished product. Quite far, I think. So it's certainly a topic that has interested us, and it's something we would like to do. But it would have to be a very different approach than Hearts of Iron. It would have to be, I think the ideological meter would still work, but you'd have to have something for non-aligned nations. There'd have to be a little bit more fluidity. You would have to have, a lot more coups, I think, in Africa and Asia and South America, and ways for that to be the way great powers gain political power instead of, moving tanks on a map.
So I just want to add this one thing.
Yeah.
If they're making a Cold War game, I want you to be the project lead, because the way you kind of like project that whole thing right there, because the way you kind of put it, I thought an East versus West game would have worked, but the way you kind of like dived in of how, corporations, NGOs, that would flesh out that game so much more. It would have so much more depth into it. So I totally see.
Well, it would also be realistic. I mean, you can't have a game. You can't have a game where the most important thing is how many tanks you have in the Cold War era, because that's not how it works. It's not how the United Fruit Company gets stuff done. The United Fruit Company doesn't send in the army; they send in the CIA. That's how, and the CIA does it for the corporations. I mean, it's there's a whole thing to be done on. In fact, that might make an interesting game for somebody to do. Just do a game about multinational government manipulation. Um, and just it doesn't even have to be the real world. It could be a fake world, some shadow president type stuff or a secret agenda. To harken back to some hidden agenda. Harken back, talking about some old games from the 80s and early 90s, hidden agenda, or these are the games. These are the type of thing to really reflect Cold War politics is small scale, isn't the great power stuff. Because the great powers are kind of like gods in the Cold War. And it's okay if you want to play a god. But gods don't go around fighting other gods. They go around messing with the ants. And the multinationals are there as the demigods. Now, the Soviet Union didn't use multinationals, and multinationals didn't use the Soviet Union, but Soviet commercial interests and oil refineries, these were not small factors in incursions in the Middle East. So yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting. I'd love to see a game like that. I'd love to see somebody do a proper Cold War or modern era geopolitical simulator that's not just. I mean, I saw one the other day on Steam, and one of the screenshots is here's the war game map, and it's a bunch of guys fighting in Paris, and it's like, it's not. There aren't wars in Paris. That's not what makes today an interesting political world. Today's an interesting political world because of all of the other stuff, because of the internet and high speed espionage and corporations shifting money around and different types of nationalisms and cross-national interest groups working together to protect the climate or to promote nefarious ideas or what have you. That's what makes the modern era interesting. It's not state on state conflict. And any game that misses that aspect of the modern era really does not understand what they're making.
So, one question that I had was segueing back to Imperator. You guys are implementing a battle tactics system where you can change that out. Now, I'm kind of curious. This new system that you're doing, which is brand new, and I believe this is the only time that you're the first game that you're kind of putting this pilot system in. Is there a possibility we could see that in future Paradox games where you can change the land battle tactics?
I think a lot would depend on how the game handled militaries. You look at something like Europa Universalis, it just has cavalry, infantry, cannon. That's it. Just 3 basic arms. In Imperator, we have light infantry and heavy infantry. And heavy infantry can be a legionnaire or it can be a hoplite phalanx. There's light cavalry and heavy cavalry. There's chariots. There's archers. There's elephants. There's all types of different kinds of troops. So it's very different. So tactics are kind of more important. The idea of fighting a skirmishing battle makes more sense if you have a light cavalry heavy army in 100 BCE compared to you have like cavalry skirmish armies in like 1720. I'm not sure you do. So because of the different army compositions and the fact that not everyone's going to be heavy. If you don't have iron, you can't make heavy infantry. So okay, maybe a full shock battle isn't what you want to have. So you want to have your army set to do skirmishes because you're a light infantry archer-based army. So you want to set your tactics to that and to avoid the shock forces. So you'll have tactics versus tactics based on force composition. So any game that has a varied force composition, I think is better for a tactics type game. I'm really excited to see this in this. We had some more tactics variations in March of the Eagles. So I'm not quite sure you remember a Napoleonic game we released. Oh God, 2013 maybe. Napoleonic game that we developed and released. It had a more detailed force composition. It had one general, and you'd have sub-generals commanding different wings and different forces, and they could have different tactical approaches. So we had that in there, and I don't think it was quite as well implemented as it is in Imperator. It's certainly not as intuitive as it was in Imperator. But I think like I said, but because it had, heavy cavalry, light cavalry, guards, guard troops, light infantry, light cannon, heavy cannon, you could imagine how a battle would be taking place. Now, if you have an army that's all heavy infantry and elephants, you know what you want it to do. You want it to go straight for the enemy. And depending on the ground you're holding, because terrain is so important in the ancient period, you'll want to look at what province you're going to be fighting the battle in. Is it good for a pitched battle, or is it better for a skirmish battle? These are the sort of things, and there are different types, a cavalry type battle or an envelopment. All of these things are possible. And I think I'm looking forward to seeing what people think about it. I think it's an improvement, but the beauty of releasing a game is that you get the QA of thousands and thousands of people telling you that you might have been wrong about something. We've got a great QA team. Our QA team is probably responsible for how much better our games have gotten over the last 7 years. But nothing beats the QA of thousands of your fans, beating on a system and saying, well, this could be exploited. This doesn't make sense. And that's when the rubber hits the road. And we'll see if this actually works for the audience. I think it's great. And I hope it is something that we can do for future type games that have, variable kinds of troops, or maybe a Crusader Kings type thing.
Yeah, I could definitely see this system, change, not changing, but I would say it's going to, I've said this repeatedly, but like adding more depth. And I feel like, I know I've used that term a couple of times during this podcast, but I feel that's what you guys have been doing. You had Hearts of Iron 1 and then 2 and then 3 and 4, and then same with EU. And you guys set up a base and then you add more and then more and then more. And I feel now like Imperator, there's so much there, not only from the deployment, you took I feel like the economy system, that depth that you had in Victoria, and then added into this game. Then the awesome combat system that you're kind of innovating there, where different battle tactics. And then on top of that, you took the new graphics and the lighting effects that you did with your recent games there. So I feel like this is almost like the pinnacle of all the hearts of all the Paradox games, and you're making this perfect Rome game.
Well, I mean, it's not perfect because there's going to be expansions. You know that. So it's not. No, there are things that we're very happy with it. And yet the challenge for all of our games is to have. We want to add more depth to our game, but we want to make them easier to play. We want to have complex, but not make them complicated. And that's really hard to do when you want to have a complex, deep game. And so much depends on the interface and the icons, the tutorials. And I think we're getting better at that and better at that and better at that, because there are millions and millions of people who love history and who just feel a bit scared of our games. And I don't think they should. I think our games are actually kind of approachable with a little bit of hand-holding. And you're certainly getting, I think that, Europa Universalis 4 is a lot more approachable than Crusader Kings. Hearts of Iron is kind of its own beast. There's only so much you could do when you want to have a war game and grand strategy game. But I think Imperator is going to strike that really nice chord with people. When we had the press event in the fall, we had people who had never played a Paradox game there. People who had, they knew the Total War games, but never played our games. So we invited them and to see what they thought, and they could see how they could respond. How experienced strategy gamers would respond to this game, and they responded very well. They got it really, really quickly. Now the trek is to widen that to an even larger audience, because there are so many people I would like to see playing our games. I'd like to see more young people play our games. I want to see more women playing our games. I want to see more old people playing our games, like old history teachers sort of stuff. I want to see more people of color playing our games, because we have their histories as well. We have India's, we have Africa's, and we have China's, and we have all of these places. We try to do justice to their histories, and we may not always be. And the only way we'll know that is we get some feedback from these audiences, and it's really important to us that we get that we treat these regions with respect. And so the complexity is the depth is, and that's just who we are. It's a very, very important part of us. But, there's a problem, there's the issue of, depth without losing anyone. So you want to scaffold that stuff right. You look at Hearts of Iron 3, it went probably a bit too far into the complicated area. I think it just, pushed a bit too far as far as, how many menus you had to learn, et cetera, and what is the AI allocation, responsibilities, sort of stuff. But I think we also learned a lot of very important lessons from Hearts of Iron 3. I don't think you get the military plan system in Hearts of Iron 3 without all of the let's have the AI handle this stuff. Sorry, you don't get the military plans in Hearts of Iron 4 without the how do you let the AI handle all of these troops in the Eastern Front in Hearts of Iron 3. I think those systems, one came right out of the other. Only one of them is much more approachable and much more straightforward, and I think it works pretty well. And yet it's hard. I mean, depth is our goal. We want to make deep games, but we also increasingly want to make welcoming games. We really do want everybody who loves history, who loves strategy, to come into our games. I think Stellaris has been really good at welcoming anybody who likes science fiction can jump into Stellaris, and they'll see echoes of their favorite science fiction. They'll see bits of Asimov, and they'll see bits of Star Trek, and they'll see bits of Bester and bits of Le Guin and bits of Babylon 5, all cobbled up into this really weird stew. And I think it's great. And I think Stellaris has done a fantastic job. And I think we can do that for history. And Hope Imperator, I've had a lot of history YouTubers, people who don't play a lot of games, but they might do YouTube of Roman history, say, hey, this looked like my kind of game. Do you think we can try this out? And I said, yes, you are the people I want to try this game. The people who don't play games but love history. I want you guys to get into this and to love this and be a part of this community.
You mentioned Star Trek, and I'm a big Star Trek fan. Got a little Captain Kirk communicator here. So one question that I had was, you guys have jumped into the sci-fi genre here with Stellaris. Now I'm very curious. Do you guys have any interest, or is there a possibility that you might be tackling such IPs as like Star Trek? Because Star Trek is in dire need of a great strategy game, and it would be incredible if Paradox would come up and make that Star Trek game for this.
Yeah, I've heard this from time to time. I don't know. I don't handle IPs or licensing. I mean, for example, the Game of Thrones mod for Crusader Kings 2. I mean, wouldn't it be great if we had the Game of Thrones license? Wouldn't that be fantastic if we had that, so we could actually, give that mod some support and push it and promote it and license it? Because that's a fantastic mod. And there are Star Trek mods, there are Star Wars mods, and some of them are really, really good. And you see people. I mean, the mods are great, but we can't touch those. We can't promote them. We can't invite them. We can't give them any financial support or anything, because that just gets into all kinds of legal messes. But as far as officially getting an IP for that, I mean, there are all kinds of IPs I think I'd love to have. I love Star Trek. I love Babylon 5. I would love for us to get a hold of, some iconic piece of science fiction or fantasy stuff and just go wild with it, because we do have the teams that can do this. I mean, not just in Stockholm. We have the team in Paradox Arctic and Umeå. We have Paradox Malmo, which is full of talented people. And we're acquiring a whole bunch of studios who are doing some great stuff, and we've acquired the guys who do Planetfall and the BattleTech guys. We're finding studios that can fill these little spots that we don't necessarily have. We the guys who own the BattleTech license, they're ours. I mean, that's fantastic. And BattleTech's just a great, great game. And I'm just so happy to work with those guys. They're the sweetest team. And that's the BattleTech license. So it'd be nice to have a grand strategy IP like Star Trek or a Star Wars, or the Star Wars is a strategy game too, damn. I'm not sure how interesting. I'm not sure what period you'd set it in, because I don't think Star Wars is actually an interesting grand strategy setting now that I think about it. But Star Trek certainly is. Babylon 5 certainly is.
Star Wars Rebellion?
Yeah, there are all kinds of them that we could do. I don't know. It's an idea. You can bring it up with our vice president who's in charge of this stuff, VP of acquisitions. I would absolutely be thrilled for us to do some sort of licensed IP thing, because I think we could do it right. I think it's the kind of thing we have the team that has a talent to do it. If you look at Stellaris, you'll see there's just this deep, deep love of classic science fiction, including Star Trek. So, I'd like to see some of those people put on that kind of a thing, but I mean, I don't know anything about any of that. These are the types of things that if it was to happen, I would learn about it like 6 months after it happened. Because unless it's a game that I'm working on, I'm generally like left out of. I don't know, somebody mentions everything has a code name internally, and we all talk in code names. So someone mentions a code name, I'm like, that's a new code name. I have no idea what that is. So then I have to find out what that code name is, and so it's kind of fun to do that sort of thing.
I've heard code names called Kobayashi Maru.
All of our code names internally for Paradox developed games are Roman history, and all of the external ones are now 1980s TV shows.
Oh, cool.
They used to be Kevin Costner movies. So we had Project Dances with Wolves and Project Bull Durham and that sort of thing. Project Postman, yeah, we had that. But all of their internal code names are Roman emperors and or Roman or classical figures, and it's so I haven't run into any Project Tiberius Kirk or anything anywhere. So it's an interesting idea. I mean, it's something that it's something I've heard before. People have thought, hey, we should do this. Every time there's a bad Star Trek game, or every time people think about whatever Star Trek mod comes in, gets a bit of press, people ask, why don't we take it over and do it officially? It's like, money. I don't control the budgets. I don't know where our money goes. We set Rod Humble up in a new studio. The money goes there, I guess. Paradox tectonic. But I'm glad you have such, as a Star Trek fan, I'm glad you have such faith in us. It's a testimony to your belief that we can do this right.
Well, if you guys ever decide to do it, I'll be sure to have a check with my savings account and deposit it into the Paradox.
Where would you have us start? Would you have us start at first contact, or would you have us start later?
One thing, game that I really thought was really cool, where you guys could probably start at, like, do you ever remember Star Trek: Birth of the Federation?
Yeah.
That game, like, where you can actually go from like the beginning of, I guess, where First Contact was, all the way to like present day, and kind of go through all the ages, would be really cool.
Okay. Yeah, it might be neat. It's a fantastic world, and I'd love to get into it. But it's these decisions are above my pay grade. I'm just I learn about what's in my silo and learn about other stuff as calls come in. We're a company of 300 people now, and it's impossible to keep track of everything that is going on.
So, kind of changing out worlds here. So I want to switch from the space world to the mobile world. So, a couple of years ago, there was rumors that in the mobile tech, like on Touch Arcade and stuff like that, where they were talking about the possibility of Hearts of Iron being ported to iOS and Android, to like the tablet or the phone market. Was that were these rumors like just rumors, or was there actually something in the works of some for mobile port of a game like that?
You know that I can't talk about internal rumors, even if I could, but I'm not going to say anything. But we've experimented on all kinds of mobile things. I have never seen or heard of a mobile port for Hearts of Iron.
Oh, okay.
But in general, I'm not going to be commenting on general rumors. In general, I'll say that much. I have never played or test flighted or seen a mobile build for Hearts of Iron.
So, kind of, I guess, sidestepping off that, would there be any, I would say, interest, or would there be like, I'll use a different word, what would be the challenges of bringing like a Paradox game to the mobile platform? Would there even be an opportunity there?
Oh, there's certainly an opportunity there. I mean, Creative Assembly's done it. Firaxis has done it. I'm not sure, how profitable it's been for them, but I mean, I've played Civ 6 on my iPad. and it's fine. I mean, it doesn't have any of the expansions or other cultures, but it's a very good part of Civilization 6. I like it a lot. Um, it hurts my battery, but other than that, it's a very good port. So there's certainly opportunity there. Um, the big challenge is the perception. Is people see, oh, it's a strategy game on mobile, therefore it is free to play, it is pay to win. They see a $35 price on a mobile game. Oh, that's too much. Mobile games shouldn't cost any more than $5 or $2 or be free. This idea that you can't have a premium game on an iPad or other tablet, this bias, this stereotype, this platform bigotry in the strategy game audience, and the gaming audience in general, is the biggest problem. I mean, so we do argue. Let's say, for example, we did a Crusader Kings 3 or Crusader Kings 4 for iPad. We have to solve interface problems. We have to solve what's supposed to be an adaptation, not a pure port. It's something to take advantage of the strengths of the platform. There are a lot of strengths to mobile. Pick up and play for short sessions, easily to scroll around the map. Movement is easier with a thumb than with a mouse. With a mouse, I think, with a finger, being able to open menus or check information quickly. There's a lot you can do with a finger on an iPad that makes so much sense for strategy games. I just think it'd be the perfect platform. So say we do this adaptation, we have to convince people that it's worth $30, $40 to buy it, because there's a lot of work in making that sort of thing. It's not simply copying and pasting it over. There's just, especially to iPad. I mean, it's one thing to do it for maybe for Android with maybe a little bit more agreement in the code across the Google space, but for iPad, there's a lot of work to do. So it is something that I would love to see us do. I would love to see us more active in the mobile space. We've acquired, the Prison Architect license, so maybe there'll be an Architect game there. But I would love to see us do a strategy game on mobile. I use my iPad quite a bit for games. I'm just getting into Brogue again because. Brian Reynolds just did this epic thread of him playing Brogue on his iPad. It's a roguelike, and it's just great. It's just perfect for this. I mean, why aren't there more classic roguelikes on my iPad? Why can't I just, play Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup or Angband on my iPad? Because Brogue works perfectly. There's no reason I shouldn't be able to do something like that with a grand strategy game. The tablets are becoming more powerful. They're becoming omnipresent. And if I can use it to do my invoices and my spreadsheets, there's no reason I shouldn't be able to do a grand strategy game on it, with some changes and some adaptations and reflections for the platform. Now we have Stellaris on consoles. People said it couldn't be done. People said you couldn't do a grand strategy game on a console, and we've just done that. So who knows?
Wow. Yeah. So I'm very excited based upon that. I mean, I hope you guys do go into the mobile space, because you guys do incredible grand strategy games. So something like that on my iPad or my phone. Like you were saying, I do like a lot of those mini sessions of like 20 minutes here, 30 minutes there. When I'm at the DMV or like at work or even on duty, like I'll get 20 minutes to go eat my lunch, and I'll just pop up Civilization or something like that. But I guess my last question that I have is a game that's kind of near and dear to my heart. I would say it wasn't the first Paradox game that I ever played. I think it was the second. I'm kind of a little phasey on that because this is the 90s, and I was besides going out every night, drink with my friends. A lot of that is kind of killed out all of my brain cells. But I picked up this game back in the 90s called Victoria. And it was by far one of the best games that I've ever played in my life. And years later, you guys made a sequel. And I don't know if it was successful or not. I don't know if you guys mentioned, I don't know if I looked at
Victoria 2. When we announced Victoria 2, The CEO at the time, Fred Wester, said he would shave his head if it ever made a profit, and he ended up shaving his head. So it did make a profit.
That's awesome. I'm glad. All right. I was always wondering. That was one of the questions that I had for you. Was just like, did he shave off his head? Because I remember that was in the forums, and
Yeah, it was one of Fred's boasts, and it worked. He ended up. It still baffles me. Victoria too. Yes.
So is based on Victoria 2 being successful, and I'm assuming 1 was successful. So would Victoria 3 make sense? Would that be a possibility down the road?
Well, I mean, successful is always relative. I mean, I don't know the exact sale numbers because Victoria 2 was before my time. But you have to remember that no Paradox game sold, I think, over a couple of 100,000 copies until Crusader Kings 2.
Oh, wow.
Which has sold millions. And Europe's House 4 has sold over 1 million. I'm not sure what the Hearts of Iron numbers, or I know that Stellaris has sold over 1 million. City Skylines has sold 6 million. I mean, these are the games. Crusader Kings 2 and City Skylines opened up whole new audiences for us. So now we have a lot more people. We can make a lot better games. But it also means that success is kind of redefined. What does it mean to be? Does this mean that Victoria 3 would sell 1 million as well? Because we have that bigger audience now? Maybe. It is probably the game we're asked for a lot. I wish I could say I loved Victoria the way that other people love Victoria. It is one of these, I guess it's like college football. It is one of these things that people love, and I do not understand why people have this huge devotion to college football. It's okay. American football is an interesting enough sport, but it's your college, It's a place you go for 4 years, and then you move on. I don't understand you people, your country. It's so weird. I lived in Maryland for a decade. They never figured that out. So Victoria's kind of in there. People love it, and God bless them. Victoria 2 it's a design that if you were to talk to the developers now, get the few drinks in them and off the record, I'm sure they'd have a lot of stories about that development process. I mean, yeah, it ended up making a profit. I'm not sure it made a huge profit, but it's one of these cult favorites that, is a kind of thing that I'm not going to say it's coming because I don't know what's coming or what's not. I don't know what's being worked on behind the scenes. But it wouldn't surprise me that, somewhere in some cubicle, there's somebody in the company who's made this up a passion project to try to fix it, to try to save it, to try to make it make sense. Because so little of that game made any sense. The colonization system. Does anybody know how the world market works? I mean, both in real life and in Victoria. Does anybody understand international economics? It is the whole budgeting and the political system and the reform. There's so much of that game I just love. The fact that you had to force revolution to make your country better. Sometimes I just love that idea of social progress. Very, very Marxian synthesis, antithesis. Hegel and Marx, all that great stuff. I just love the dialectic of history mechanic in there. And it's a game that people want us to come back to. And every time there's a rumor of a new game, that rumor is it's Victoria 3. And that's something we're going to have to put up with probably until we do Victoria 3. People love it. It's a fascinating time of history. There is just so much interesting stuff going on there. It's kind of a long 19th century from Napoleon to World War I. It's got the scramble for Africa and all the horrors there. It has explosions in philosophy and science. It has some amazing, literature and exploration. It has towering figures and villains. It is the American Civil War. It has the Indian Mutiny. It has, the Opium Wars. It has the opening of Japan. It has the Congress of Vienna, Congress of Berlin. There are all of these unifications of Italy. There's just so much in that century that is fantastic. That can almost make a game out of it on its own. Like you could do a short board game version of the unification of Italy, and I just play the hell out of that. I'd love for us to go back to it, and it wouldn't surprise me if somebody always has that going on somewhere. I mean, like I said, designs are often going on in the background before I know about them, before anybody knows about them. Besides, somebody will go to their project lead and say, "Hey, can I have a couple of hours this week to work on X?" And the project lead will say, "Hey, you're up to date. You're up to date on your work. Sure, take your time on X." And then that X becomes a pitch, and then that pitch becomes a build, and that build becomes a game, and that's generally when I first know it exists.
Well, I hope they're somewhere in that process, and you never know. It'd be kind of cool if that happens because that game.
So why do you love Victoria? Like, there's so many people who love it.
I think I really love Victoria for the fact that it covers, like you were saying, a lot of key events, the scientific side, the economy side. I really love the economy side. I'm not really like a big economist, or I really don't even play a lot of economy games. But the fact that it mixes economy with like in that game, I generally only have a few wars. I'll play for weeks, and I'll focus on the economy. I'll build like factories here. I'll expand my railroad, develop relations with other countries, put factories in other countries. I spend a lot of time on the economy system, and it kind of, I would say it's a distraction from the war system. And I really like that fact because I don't have to say, all right, which country am I invading next? Which country am I gonna conquer? Which continent am I gonna try to reign supreme on? I'm not doing that. I'm trying to say, all right, I want to develop my country, develop social welfare programs. I want to make sure that I have a good industry going, that my treasury is going up, not going down. And war is kind of like at the bottom of my awareness pool, and I really love it for that fact. And then you have like these events that pop in, like the American Civil War. There's a lot of times where I say, what, I don't go down the historical side. I'm like, all right, I don't know, somehow I'm able to free the slaves without having to declare a war. Apparently the South just says okay, and I literally click the button for free the slaves, and the South's like okay. And I never have the American Civil War, which is kind of odd. Did you ever run into that?
Yeah, it's no. I always end up fighting the Civil War as the U.S. I never can get around it. But yeah, I mean, as soon as you mentioned the economy, that's the same thing with me. What I liked about it was just building the system. But there are a lot of people when they play Hearts of Iron, stop playing when the war starts because they just want to build an efficient factory machine. They want to see how many things they can push out. They're just interested in, factories and efficiencies. Oh. That's their thing. It's like, that's fantastic. It's like Factorio, but in Hearts of Iron. Some people just like the building. And, the war starts and just kind of get bored with moving armies around. They want to build the armies and deploy them and see how many they can push out. That's the fun for them.
Oh, wow.
And I think it's an interesting way there's so many ways to play our games. And that's one of my favorite things about them. And that's another reason why I think Movie Universalis 4 is my favorite. That you can just play it in so many different styles. And it's one reason I really love Paradox. That there's this flexibility for a lot of different game styles out there.
Yeah, and it's weird that they literally cancel playing the game, when the war starts because you're not kind of forced to go into war. I was just playing the UK, and I decided, well, I'm not going to be part of the Allies, so I left the Allies. So there's you don't have to be forced into a war. You could literally just sit it out and kind of watch everybody kind of grind themselves to to dust, kind of thing. So, wow. I didn't know that. That's interesting. So those are pretty much all the questions I had. Is there anything I missed or anything you want to cover?
I mean, you're the one who's running the show, so you know what I've covered. You know what we haven't covered.
I'm pretty much good to go. I'm really glad I get to pick your brain. I really got a really good insight into into Paradox, and I really love the concept that you mentioned about the Cold War game. I kind of changed my viewpoint on East versus West, and you kind of, I was kind of hoping you guys were gonna somehow come out with an East versus West, but since you added all these other different concepts you need to consider, I think your approach is the approach that should.
Well, we'll see. I mean, my approach to a Rome game would have been very different. Mine would have been more Crusader Kingsy than this. So
Well, I
it
feel like
was
the Crusader Kings in this game.
there is some, but I would have made it like you. I would have made it like you play a Roman family, and you have to accumulate your land and build your power, and you don't run the country. You could be elected to office and assign generalships, but you don't run the country unless you are actually running the country. You're just playing a family, and you're a Roman consul, a Roman noble family, and you've got to get your sons and grandsons into office and protect the family prestige, and that's the game. Through accumulating land and getting governorships, and if you're a governor, you can't interfere in politics because you're too far away, but maybe your son can. So there's all this other stuff going on. That would be my idea for Romeo because I'm interested in the politics. That's my thing. I read the books about the politics and the family relations and all that stuff. That's my thing about Roman history. So if I was to that Rome game, it would look very little like Johann's, and I think Johann's game looks great, but looks nothing like the one that I would make.
So this is a good opportunity for anybody listening to make a mod of that.
Oh, I'm sure it's being considered.
Well, if it does, I'm definitely gonna put it on my download list. If it's a mod, I think it's free. So unless you get it for a DLC. But yeah, so I guess that's all I have. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoy your podcast. When I get a chance to listen to it, it's always quite interesting. So thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm hoping to have Matt on the next episode. I know his schedule is a little bit hectic. He's very busy, so hoping to get him next time. And thank you for coming on the show. And we'll catch you guys in the next episode.
All right.